In our last video, when we were talking about Gymshark, I mentioned that we were going to talk about an interesting company, and interesting because of what's happening right now with the pandemic. Travel-related businesses are taking an absolute hammering on their revenue and their income. It's starting to turn with the vaccines, and in the UK, we're hearing there are a number of people over 50s are starting to book more travel. So really interesting to see what's going on. So today we're going to talk about Thomas Cook, Ted, and they went bankrupt. Was it last year or 2018? But when they did so, there was something like 260,000 people that were stranded across different parts of the world, and they had to struggle getting back. In fact, they had to pay out of their own pockets with a lot of them. But you and I talked about this company, and in fact, you said there was actually all the signs were there. So really looking forward to seeing what you've uncovered about the finances and how our viewers can actually start to learn some of these things for themselves.
You're absolutely right. I think it was 2019 that Thomas Cook went bankrupt, and I think the repatriation. They said that the repatriation at the time was the largest since the Second World War. Although I'm kind of guessing now that the pandemic repatriation probably beat even Thomas Cook. So it's all running into history. So you're absolutely right. Lots of people booking their holidays right now. And it always reminds me of Thomas Cook, because lots of people say, why did no one see it happening? And what I want to do today, Moeed, is to say you could have seen it was going to happen, but only if you knew where to look. So Thomas Cook, don't just book it, Thomas Cook it. You remember their famous strap line. And we're going to look at the accounts and see, were they booking the numbers, or were they trying to cook the numbers? So we're going to jump into the accounts, and what I'm showing you right now is the auditor's report, the independent auditor's report to the members, and this was on the 2018 accounts. Now, there's quite a lot of information in the audit report, but I've highlighted a specific paragraph that says we conclude that the use of the going concern basis of accounting, and going concern means they're trading and expected to continue to trade for the foreseeable future, is appropriate, and concur with the directors, and that no significant uncertainty has been identified. Now, if you read the kind of the detail, which we're not going to go through, I'm not going to read out this. If you want to, you can find the report on the internet and read it yourself. But if we read the detail, what we see is that they're aware that there are issues, but the directors are confident that they can overcome those issues, and the auditors agree with the directors. So we need to be careful here that the auditor's report, it doesn't necessarily mean that if they give a clean set of a clean bill of health to an set of accounts, then the accounts are okay, or the company's not going to go bust. So that's kind of our first learning lesson there. So let's jump straight in and have a look at the accounts. So here we've got, now I've been watching this company since about 2009. Okay, so what I want to do is to share with you the 2010-9 accounts, and then we'll have a look at the 2018 and 17 accounts and see what's actually changing. And the first place anybody looks at a set of accounts is usually the income statement. And what we find is that if you look at the income statement of this company, the problems are already highlighted. So this company, they're working on a gross margin of 20%. So if I can just, let me get my annotation up. So in effect, we're looking at these numbers here. Don't worry too much about, this. The fact that they split these two columns out is almost irrelevant. We're really focusing on the total column here. And we see that they're turning over about £9 million and making a gross profit of 2 million, i.e. the holidays that we buy the holiday from them for £9 million, and they then buy the holiday for £7 million, for example. In fact, we're in billions here. Yeah. So and that's kind of reasonable. They're in a business where they've, it's tight margins. If they try and buy a cheap holiday and sell it to us for too much, even in 2010, we're on the internet, we're booking them ourselves directly. So, it's a challenge. They're a low margin business. And then we see the costs of actually running the business, which are here, and that results in the operating profit. And the operating profit is about 167 million pounds, and that's 2% of turnover. Okay, so this is a low margin business. And the problem is here. And we see the finance costs, and it's the cost of servicing their debt. And the cost of servicing their debt in 2010 was 180 million pounds. And that is a problem.
And just to clarify for our viewers, what Ted means by servicing the debt is very simply the interest that they have to pay on the debt that they have.
Absolutely. So, Moeed, if you take out a mortgage personally, you fill in these long forms and they ask you stupid questions like, how much do you spend on socks each month? And you look at the bank and go, what a stupid question. I don't buy socks on a monthly basis. But what the bank is really trying to do is to work out, can you afford the mortgage? So they'll look at your salary, but then they want to know that, the cost of deducting the food you eat, because Moeed, if you don't eat, you'll die, and if you die, you won't be able to repay your mortgage. And then they look at the cost of travel to work, for example, because if you don't travel to work, then you'll get made redundant, and then you won't be able to pay your mortgage. So what they're trying to do is to look at, here's your salary, here's all the costs you incur running your life. Do you have enough left over at the end of the month to pay the mortgage? And that's really what we're looking at here. We're looking at the income that they earn from the holiday makers, the costs of providing that holiday, the costs of running the business, the money left over, the operating profit is there, and it's left over to service the debt. And in 2010, they were struggling to service that debt. Now, the first question has got to be, well, how much debt is there, and why have they got so much debt?
Exactly.
Now I'm gonna scroll down through the accounts. What's interesting before we get to the debt is, before we get to the balance sheet, we find a cash flow statement. Now, this is the first company I've ever come across where the cash flow statement goes before the balance sheet.
Yes.
Okay, so it's usually income statement, balance sheet, cash flow. Sometimes it's balance sheet, income statement, but the cash flow is always last. And these guys have put the cash flow much further up. And I'll explain why a little bit later on.
Okay.
But we'll drop down to the balance sheet. So here's the balance sheet. And at a very simple level, if you think about it, Moeed, if you're going to run a travel company, what are the assets that you're going to need to buy to run your travel company? What do you need?
Well, whatever you can travel in. So planes, ferries, ships.
Yeah, you could lease the airplanes.
Coaches.
You can buy but most travel companies don't buy the ships. So Thomas Cook buys its own airplanes, but most travel companies, I have a friend of mine who runs a local travel company here. He runs it from his laptop.
Right.
So he doesn't need any assets.
Yeah, true.
So when we see a company like this with 5.4 billion pounds in assets, and these are the things that we need to run the business. So these are what we call the non-current assets: tables, chairs, plant machinery, equipment, computers. For these guys, aeroplanes.
That's interesting. I thought Thomas Cook's not unique element, but what they do is that because they own those assets, i.e. the planes and even the ferries themselves, that enabled them in some way to be more competitive. But it turns out it was just
they don't own they're not owning the ferries, so they owned the aeroplanes because they were looking to be able to fly all their passengers to specific destinations, and rather depending on the standard airlines, they actually started to run their own airlines. But really, for Thomas Cook, for them, it's about buying. They'll go to Benidorm or wherever it is, and they will buy the holidays locally, and then they will package them up and sell them here in the UK, so that I don't have to think about booking a flight and a hotel separately, I get the package deal from Thomas Cook. Effectively, that's what they're doing. Okay,
Right.
but don't forget they're buying locally, so it's not them who are running it. They'll have a rep out there, but it's the hotel owner who's actually, you know, who owns the hotel, for example, not Thomas Cook.
It's a model of convenience
So what we see,
and cost savings.
absolutely makes life a lot easier. So what's interesting about this company is that they've got all of these non-current assets, these things that they're invested in. They've got a whole lot of aeroplanes, 655 million pounds worth of aeroplanes, and okay, that's understood. But the biggest number is this intangible asset. Now, an intangible asset is something you can't touch. It's something you physically can't touch. So what is it, Moeed, you think that Thomas Cook owns that's worth 3.8 billion pounds and you can't touch it? And I'll give you a clue. Don't say brand.
I'm struggling to think about what that would be. Usually that's, I mean, I know with intangible assets, it's usually the system that they use to run the bookings, for example. I know with other companies,
3.8 like, billion quid's worth of system.
No,
There's no way you're going to
and
spend
that's why I'm
3.8
struggling, because I know in our previous video when we talked about Kazoo, their intangible assets was the e-commerce almost platform that they created to be able to select cars, etc. But I'm struggling to think what the hell what could be 3 billion? What could be a cost of 3 billion
Absolutely.
for someone like Thomas Cook?
So Kazoo had an IT operating system of about 2.8 million pounds, and that's a little bit more reasonable. 3.8 billion. I mean, even the government would struggle to waste 3.8 billion on a new National Health Service IT system, although don't quote me on that. And in fact, what we find, if we look at note 12, we find that it's goodwill. And if you remember, goodwill arises on the acquisition of another company.
Yes.
So you may remember back in 2007, what was Thomas Cook up to?
Yeah, they merged with a company called MyTravel, right?
Absolutely. So they were very, very acquisitive. They were buying companies like MyTravel and other operating travel companies. They were growing through acquisition. And how were they funding that growth?
Oh, they funded it through debt, didn't they?
Exactly. Yeah. And so what we see here is that they got all this goodwill, and goodwill is the difference between what you pay for a company and what you actually get. So when you buy a company, you get the net assets, you get all the assets and all the liabilities. But if you think about it, if you're going to buy a travel company, all you're actually buying is, you know, a couple of blokes in mum's attic. I mean, that's it. Because that's what you need to run a travel company. So what you're really buying is the database and the reputation. And that's an intangible. So we see a very large amount of goodwill arising on acquisition.
And that's astounding. And just for our viewers, some interesting facts here. Well, one really interesting fact about MyTravel. And you know, I don't understand why they bought them, because in 6 years, that company had only been profitable once in 6 years. So presumably they were buying them and merging them because they had a big kind of custom client distribution network of some kind. They were capturing more market share, but at what cost? And you're saying it's almost 4 billion of
Absolutely.
cost.
And so what they're doing is that they're not buying MyTravel. What they're really buying is the database and the reputation, and then they plug it into their system that says, we know how to run this database at a profit, and they're running it, as we said, at a 20% gross profit. So we can see the debt in the non-current liabilities. So here we go. Here's the non-current liabilities, and we can see the debt. There's the long-term borrowings very clearly on the balance sheet, and they've got some issues on retirement and some long-term provisions. So the non-current liabilities is actually pretty high. And if we plug those into a spreadsheet, for example, we see that, you know, even at this point, they're about 50-50 debt funded. So it's about 50% debt, 50% equity. The problem is that that was only getting worse. By 2018, it was 88% debt and only 12% equity. So this was a major problem for them. And what we see from the income statement is that they can't service that debt. Now, one other thing while we're here at the balance sheet, which is worth looking at, because we've talked about it before, is the current assets, which is this number here, and the current liabilities, which is this number here. Okay, and comparing these two numbers.
Yeah.
So the current assets, if you remember, we've discussed this. These are things which we own that we either are going to become cash or we're trying to turn into cash.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you know, the non-current assets, tables, chairs, plant machinery, things I need to run the business, the current assets, things which are going to become cash. And the current liabilities are things I have to pay soon, as opposed to the non-current, which is kind of long-term debt. So this is, do I have enough cash coming in or as cash to pay my liabilities soon? And the ratio here is 1.5 billion and 3.4 billion. Okay, and if we actually look at that in a ratio, in a liquidity ratio, that's 0.44. So that says for every £1 we owe and have to pay soon, we've got 44 pence either as cash or coming in as cash soon.
Yeah. So basically what you're effectively saying is they didn't have enough money to pay the liabilities that were due.
Actually, I'm not. What I'm saying, Moeed, is that we traditionally look at that relationship, and if it's below 1 or 0.44, then we start to ring alarm bells. However, Moeed, like everything, it never gives the full story. We need to understand the business model of Thomas Cook. So let me ask you this. How much stock, how much inventory does Thomas Cook hold?
None.
Absolutely, because it doesn't sell it. It sells a holiday. So there's no warehouses full of holidays. Okay, so there's no inventory. If you go into a Thomas Cook and book a holiday, do they say, Moeed, pay me in a couple of months' time?
No, they say pay us now.
Absolutely. So you put a deposit down as soon as possible and you pay before you go. So what you'll notice here is that the inventories are incredibly low. And also, when you look at the trade and other receivables, the number's quite high, but actually in this number here, the actual amount owed by their customers is effectively zero.
Right.
Now, Moeed, if you're a big Thomas Cook and you're negotiating with the owner of the hotel in Benidorm, when are you going to negotiate those payment terms?
Well, you're probably going to negotiate those payment terms for after you receive the money.
Absolutely.
Well, not probably, you are.
Yeah, and after they've been on holiday.
Yes.
So in 2010, they were negotiating, it was 55 days. After the holiday, it took them 55 days to pay the hotel. Right. So this is a very strong cash flow business. Okay, so they're getting cash in long before they pay that cash out. Okay, and that allows them, therefore, to operate at this low liquidity ratio. Right. So, Moeed, why do you think the cash flow statement appears so high up the order of pecking order?
Because it tells a better story.
Absolutely. So what they're doing is they're saying, yes, we're not that profitable, but we're very strong on our cash flow. And you can see their cash flow from operating activities. In 2010 that we're actually looking at, they made a profit of about £3 million, but we can see that their cash flow is about £300 million. Okay. So what they're saying to their shareholders is, it's okay, we've got very strong cash flow. Unfortunately, it doesn't all come through to the end. So we've been watching this company, as I said, I've been watching this company for many, many years. If we jump forward to 2018, here they are. You'll see that, you know, they're still selling about 9 billion pounds worth of holidays, 9.6 billion. So they're not growing at all. The operating margins are pretty much the same. You'll notice that it hasn't really changed. Their operating profit, there's the operating profit of about 100 million pounds, 97 million pounds. They're still struggling to service the debt. It's costing them 155 million pounds in interest alone. And don't forget, the interest, they're not trying to repay the debt. They need to refinance that debt. They need to roll it over. But actually, Thomas Cook has got too much debt. They need to start paying it down. By this point, it's 90% debt funded.
Gosh.
There's the previous figures. The previous year, they're just about booking a small profit. Here, they're making a pretty big loss. They're sailing very, very close to the wind. Let's scroll down. Let's look at that debt actually. So again, we've got the cash flow very high up, still generating lots of cash. Let's look at the balance sheet. Let's go and look at their non-current liabilities. And we can see the long-term borrowings. Well, they were trying to bring it under control, but it's at £1 billion. So they got £1 billion of long-term borrowings. There's no prospect of being able to repay it at the moment. They're just not generating sufficient cash. They're struggling to be able to service it. At some point, the creditors, the people who've lent the money, are going to run out of patience and say, you know what, we're not going to lend to you anymore. So really what this story is telling us is this is a company that's been in financial difficulties for a very long time. Travel, quite a fickle business. If you're going to run a travel company, you've got to run a strong balance sheet. You've got to have a really good, solid balance sheet with a bit of cash in the bank to be able to weather the storm. Whether it's a global financial crisis or a pandemic, you just need to, a little bit more strength than these guys had. I mean, they were buying back their own shares in 2007, for example.
Yeah, especially with that amount of debt as well.
Exactly. And so every year they're rolling over their debt. They're negotiating. They've got a 12-month facility. They're negotiating with the providers. They're renewing it. It's not a problem. And it's not a problem until one day the people just go, you know what? We're not going to refinance. We're not going to renew. We want our money back.
Yeah.
And suddenly they go, we haven't got it. And you can see that the net assets, I mean, they're only 300, less than 300 million pounds on debt of £1 billion. So there's nowhere to absorb. And so what the creditors are going to do is say, well, sell your assets. Well, what are their assets? I mean, they haven't got any. It's all goodwill. Okay, so they need to package up the different parts. You can sell the airplanes, and there may be other travel companies who will buy the database of Thomas Cook, for example, but they know this is a distressed sale, and distressed asset sales come at much reduced prices. So the providers of the debt will have taken a haircut on the amount that they've lent, and there would be nothing left for the shareholders.
So this really wasn't a surprise then, right? If you know what you're looking for, and if you just dug into the accounts a little bit more, you would have seen a story of a company that's quite frankly hanging by its fingernails off the edge of a cliff, and it's been doing so for quite some time. And at some point, whoever the debtors were, whoever the lenders were, at some point they're going to say, right, we want our money back, and no one else is going to lend you anymore, which is exactly what happened, right? They tried to get some refinancing for the debt. I think they had a Chinese company, in advanced talks with a Chinese company willing to give them money, but it just wasn't in time. And
absolutely,
that was it.
And it comes back, and this has been around for a long time. So Ernest Hemingway wrote a book called The Sun Also Rises, and there's a wonderful quote in there from a chap called, one of the characters called Mike, and he's asked how he went bankrupt, and he says in two ways: gradually and then suddenly. And that's exactly what's happened to Thomas Cook. You can see the writing on the wall. It's coming, and when it happens, it's like a dam bursting. The pressure builds up, but everyone goes, well, the dam is still there, everything's fine, and then suddenly, bang, it goes, and when it goes, whump, it goes properly, and it causes a right mess.
So this is very interesting, especially for our viewers who might be entrepreneurs or even salespeople. Actually, even those in R&D, for example, if you're going to partner with a company, these are some of the things you want to really look at. What kind of debt do they have, especially non-current liabilities? Is there any debt that's wrapped up in goodwill, for example? Are they able to service that debt? And how long has this been going on for? Because you want to know that company you're partnering with is actually going to be around for the future. You want to know if you're going to sell to that company, you know, are you going to put in all that effort and good work only for them to not be able to pay you, which is really unprofitable for you and a waste of time, actually. So this was very, very interesting to look at, because quite frankly, it was something that you could have seen, and if you just know where to look at.
And you're absolutely right. And you know, Coca-Cola, for example, 65% debt, but it's not a problem for Coca-Cola because they're making lots of money. They can easily service that debt. So it's just not an issue for them. So it's looking at the service, look for the debt, look for the serviceability of that debt, and look at what that debt was used to buy. If it was used to buy tangible assets, there's a bit of security to the lenders. But you know, goodwill is an intangible asset. You can't put goodwill on eBay and sell it. I got a question for you, Moeed. Obviously 2020 was a bit of a struggle, but did you go on holiday in 2018 or 2019?
Oh, yes.
And did you go with a holiday company?
No.
Okay, so you probably booked it yourself, but if you ever do go with a holiday company, do you check their accounts to check their financial viability before you book the holiday?
Good question, Ted. I will now. I definitely will now.
Well, fortunately, don't forget, as an individual, you do have protection, so that you need to make sure that the company you're booking with is ATOL protected. There's ABTA. Both of these are UK-based protection, and that means that when companies like Thomas Cook go bankrupt, the insurance company will pick up the tab and will sort it out. So we did get everybody back. It involved some government intervention. We had stories of people who weren't allowed to check out of the hotels because the hotel hadn't been paid. And of course, if you're a hotel operator, Thomas Cook isn't going to pay you until, you know, 80 days. In fact, I think it's 88 days by the end. So you're not going to get paid for 90 days after the people have left, whereas, you know, you've already paid up. So the holiday makers, they pay Thomas Cook in advance, they go to the hotel, Thomas Cook goes bust, and the hotel owner says, I haven't been paid, you're not leaving until you pay the bill, for example. So
yes,
I don't know if there are any stories of people actually, you know, ultimately being out of pocket. I know that people struggled at the time, but hopefully ATOL, ABTA, travel insurance, all of these, it's really important that you make sure that you're covered, so that if the company does go bust, and it does happen, then you're adequately protected.
Yeah, I was going to say travel insurance. Interestingly enough, in my old days, when I was in sales and, you know, traveling about, you know, 70 to 80 flights a year, I went to meet a client in Denmark, south of Denmark. And back then there was a little known flight company that would fly from this one city into Germany, which would then be a hub for me to get back to London. Interestingly enough, that airline, when you booked a ticket with that airline, they had not one, but two options to buy bankruptcy insurance. So we never flew with them again after that, because that definitely sent alarm bells ringing. So this Thomas Cook is not a one-off. It's not an isolated thing. It's a real thing that happens around. So be sure to look out for the finances of the business and protect yourself, as Ted mentioned, with travel insurance, and make sure they're ATOL protected or some sort of protected by some sort of nationally recognized body.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, great one. And contrary to what you said on last video, I thought this was a very interesting topic, actually. So I really enjoyed this, and certainly gave me some food for thought, and I've learned a lot of things there. So thank you for that, Ted.
Excellent. Well, good to speak to you again, Moeed, and hopefully we'll all be back on our airplanes, back on going on holiday again this year, and making sure that none of the companies we book with go bust.
Fingers crossed. Thank you, Ted.